The rain hammered against the cracked window of the tiny apartment where 17-year-old Claire Morrison sat clutching her only photograph of happier times, not knowing that in exactly 3 hours her mother would accept $20,000 from a stranger in a wheelchair to take Claire away forever, and not knowing that this transaction, designed as the cruelest abandonment, would become the doorway to a life more beautiful than she'd ever imagined possible. Claire had been invisible for most of her life, not literally, but in the way that society makes certain people disappear. She carried an extra 100 pounds on her frame that her mother, Victoria Morrison, treated like a personal insult, a physical manifestation of failure that needed to be hidden, criticized, and constantly reminded of its unworthiness. And in their small apartment in downtown Seattle, Victoria had spent 17 years making sure Claire understood exactly how much of a burden and disappointment she was. Victoria was a former beauty queen whose looks had faded faster than her ambitions, who'd married Claire's father for his money, only to discover he had none, who'd raised Claire alone after he died when Claire was 3, and who'd spent every year since resenting the daughter, who'd inherited his gentle nature and soft body, instead of Victoria's sharp cheekbones and sharper tongue. That Wednesday evening in November, Victoria paced their cramped living room with barely contained excitement, her phone clutched in her manicured hand, while Claire sat in her small bedroom trying to focus on homework and ignore the familiar sound of her mother scheming, plotting, looking for angles and advantages, in a world that Victoria believed owed her everything and had delivered nothing. "Claire, come here," Victoria called, her voice carrying that false sweetness that always preceded something terrible. And Claire's stomach dropped, because she'd learned to recognize the different flavors of her mother's cruelty, the hot anger that came with insults, the cold dismissal that came with neglect, and this syrupy manipulation that meant Victoria wanted something, and was willing to pretend affection to get it. Claire entered the living room slowly, her oversized sweater pulled tight around her body in the defensive posture that had become her default, and found her mother standing by the window with an expression that was trying to be maternal but landed somewhere closer to predatory. "Sweetheart, I've found a solution to our problems," Victoria began, and the word sweetheart from her mother's lips was so foreign that Claire immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. "We've been struggling financially, you know that, and I've been trying so hard to provide for you, despite everything." The pause before everything was weighted with meaning. "Despite your size, despite your eating, despite your existence being expensive and unrewarding, I've met someone who can help us, a very generous man who's willing to take care of you, give you opportunities I can't provide." Claire's hands started trembling. "What do you mean, take care of me?" Victoria's smile tightened. "His name is James Chen. He's wealthy. He's looking for a companion, someone to manage his household, and he's willing to pay handsomely for the arrangement." $20,000. "Claire, do you understand what that means for me, for us?" The correction was too late, and too obvious. "You're selling me," Claire whispered, the words barely audible, but heavy with horror. "To a stranger." Victoria's facade cracked, irritation bleeding through. "Don't be dramatic. I'm arranging a beneficial situation. You'll have a roof over your head, food, security, and I'll finally have the resources to live my life without being dragged down by," she gestured vaguely at Claire's body, "by responsibilities I never asked for." Claire felt something break inside her chest, some last fragile hope that her mother might actually love her, beneath the criticism and contempt. And the breaking of it was almost a relief, because hope had been exhausting to maintain in the face of relentless evidence to the contrary. "What if I say no?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. Victoria's expression went cold. "Then you can find your own way. You're 17, nearly an adult. I've sacrificed enough. This apartment is in my name. Everything here is mine. You have nothing, Claire. You are nothing without me, so you'll do this. You'll meet James Chen tonight, and you'll be grateful for the opportunity. The doorbell rang before Claire could respond, and Victoria's face transformed back into that false warmth as she rushed to answer it, leaving Claire standing in the middle of the room feeling like the floor had opened beneath her feet and she was falling through layers of betrayal into some darker place where mothers sold daughters and called it opportunity. The man who entered their apartment was not what Claire expected. Chen appeared to be in his early 30s, sitting in an electric wheelchair with quiet dignity, his dark eyes intelligent and assessing as they took in the cramped space and the tension crackling between mother and daughter, and when his gaze settled on Claire, she saw something in his expression that wasn't pity or disgust, but rather a deep sadness, as if he recognized something in her situation that resonated with his own experience. "Ms. Morrison," James said, his voice soft, but carrying unmistakable authority, "and you must be Claire." He didn't extend his hand, perhaps sensing that Claire was too overwhelmed for casual pleasantries, and instead, he simply nodded with a respect that Claire hadn't experienced in years, as if she were a person whose presence mattered, rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Victoria launched into her rehearsed speech about Claire's wonderful qualities, her cooking ability, her cleanliness, her quiet nature, describing her daughter like appliance being sold at discount, and Claire watched James's expression carefully, seeing the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way his hands gripped the wheelchair arms just a fraction harder, and she realized with surprise that he was angry, not at Claire but at the situation, at Victoria's casual cruelty dressed up as maternal sacrifice. "May I speak with Claire privately?" James asked, cutting through Victoria's sales pitch with polite firmness. Victoria hesitated, clearly wanting to control the narrative. But the promise of $20,000 made her agreeable. "Of course, I'll just be in the kitchen," she said, her smile brittle as she retreated, though Claire knew she'd be listening from just beyond the doorway, because Victoria always needed to know everything, to control every variable. James waited until Victoria was gone, then looked directly at Claire with those sad, knowing eyes. "You don't want this," he said simply, not a question, but a statement of obvious truth. Claire's throat tightened with unshed tears. "I don't have a choice." "Everyone has choices," James replied gently, "though sometimes all the options are terrible, and we're just picking the least terrible one. Is that what this is?" Claire nodded, not trusting her voice, and James sighed deeply, as if he'd hoped for a different answer, but wasn't surprised by the one he received. "My name is James Chen. I'm the founder of Chen Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it." Claire's eyes widened, because of course she'd heard of it. Chen Technologies was one of the largest software companies in the world, worth billions, and she'd assumed that James Chen, her mother mentioned, was a different person, not the actual billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud computing and appeared occasionally in tech news. And suddenly, this entire situation became even more surreal, because why would someone like him need to pay for companionship? "I can see you're confused," James continued, a slight smile touching his lips but not reaching his eyes. "The truth is, I was in a car accident 3 years ago that left me paralyzed from the waist down, and in the aftermath, I discovered that the people in my life were more interested in my money than my well-being. Friends disappeared, my fiancé left, business partners suddenly became concerned about my ability to lead the company, and I realized I was surrounded by opportunists and sycophants, with no way to distinguish genuine human connection from people performing care while calculating inheritance prospects." He paused, studying Claire's face. "I've been looking for someone who needs help as much as I do. Someone who might understand that value isn't measured in net worth or physical ability. Someone who's been underestimated and dismissed, because I thought maybe such a person would see me as a person rather than a bank account." Claire found her voice, though it came out rough with emotion. "My mother told you I was for sale." James's expression hardened. "Your mother contacted my assistant through a rather disturbing classified ad, offering her daughter as household help in exchange for cash payment." My assistant brought it to my attention because we occasionally investigate potential exploitation situations for law enforcement. But when I reviewed your mother's correspondence, I recognized something in how she described you: the casual cruelty, the transactional language, the complete inability to see you as a person with inherent worth. And I remembered what that felt like, to be valued only for what you could provide to someone else, never for who you were. He leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair. So I'm going to make you an offer, Claire, and I want you to understand that you can say no, that you have that power, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. I will pay your mother the $20,000 she's asking, and you will come live in my home, but not as a servant or an obligation. You'll have your own suite of rooms, access to education, freedom to pursue whatever interests you choose, and in exchange, I ask only for honesty, for genuine human interaction from someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being unreasonable, someone who'll have dinner with me sometimes and remind me that life is more than board meetings and profit margins, someone who understands what it's like to be invisible and can help me remember how to be visible too. Claire stared at him, trying to process an offer that sounded too good to be real, searching for the catch, the hidden cruelty, the trap that would snap shut once she agreed. Why would you do this for a stranger? James's smile turned sad again, because 6 months ago, I was in a very dark place, contemplating whether life in this wheelchair was worth continuing, and a hospital janitor named Marie, who everyone else ignored, sat with me during a panic attack and told me about losing her son, about how grief and pain don't make us worthless, they make us human. And her kindness, from someone who had every reason to be bitter about her own circumstances, saved my life that night, and I've been trying to figure out how to pay that forward, how to be for someone else what Marie was for me. And maybe you're that someone, or maybe this is a terrible idea, and we'll both regret it. But at least we'll regret it while you're safe and fed, and not living with a mother who thinks you're merchandise. Claire felt tears streaming down her face, unable to stop them, because in 17 years of life, no one had ever spoken to her with this combination of honesty and respect. No one had ever suggested that her value was inherent rather than conditional, and the offer James was making terrified her precisely because it sounded like hope. And hope was dangerous when you'd learn to live without it. What if I disappoint you? She whispered. What if I'm not worth the investment? James reached out slowly, giving Claire time to pull away if she wanted, and gently touched her hand. Claire, you're not an investment, you're a person. And people can't disappoint by simply being themselves. They can only disappoint by pretending to be something they're not. So all I ask is that you be genuinely yourself, and I promise to do the same, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. Victoria chose that moment to sweep back into the room, her practiced smile firmly in place. So, have we reached an agreement? James didn't look at Victoria, keeping his eyes on Claire. That depends on Claire. This is her decision. Claire looked at her mother, at the woman who'd spent 17 years making sure Claire knew she was unwanted, who was now practically vibrating with excitement about the money she'd receive for finally disposing of her disappointing daughter. And Claire realized that staying in this apartment, in this relationship, would slowly kill everything inside her that still hoped for better. And while James's offer was strange and uncertain, it was also the first time anyone had ever asked what she wanted, instead of telling her what she should accept. Yes, Claire said, her voice stronger than she expected. I'll come with you. Victoria's smile became genuine for the first time that evening, the satisfaction of a successful transaction, and she didn't even pretend to be sad about her daughter leaving, just immediately started discussing payment terms with James, while Claire went to her small room and packed her few belongings into a worn duffel bag, and the ease with which her mother let her go confirmed what Claire had always known but never wanted to admit. She'd never been loved here, never been wanted, and leaving wasn't losing a home because this place had never been one. The car that took them to James's house was larger than Victoria's entire apartment, driven by a kind-faced man named Robert, who loaded Claire's pathetic duffel bag into the trunk with the same care he'd show expensive luggage. And as they drove through Seattle's wealthy neighborhoods toward a gated community Claire had only seen in magazines, James sat beside her in companionable silence, not demanding conversation or gratitude, just being present while Claire processed the surreal shift her life had just taken. The house was beautiful in a way that made Claire's chest ache. Modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows, carefully designed for wheelchair accessibility, but elegant rather than clinical, filled with art and books and signs of actual life rather than the sterile showroom quality she'd expected from Billionaire real estate. "Your suite is on the first floor," James said, leading her through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. "I'm on the first floor too. There's an elevator to the second floor where the library and gym are located. Kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourself to anything. My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, comes weekday mornings, and my assistant David handles business matters, but otherwise it's just us. I work from home mostly, and I value quiet, so you won't be bothered unless you want company." He stopped at a door and opened it, revealing a bedroom suite, larger than Claire's entire previous living space, decorated in soft blues and grays, with an attached bathroom and a sitting area with bookshelves and a reading nook by the window. "This is mine?" Claire asked, unable to process that this beautiful space was hers without conditions or strings. "This is yours," James confirmed. "Completely yours. I had it prepared based on the minimal information your mother provided about your interests. The books are just suggestions. We can change anything you don't like. Make it your own, Claire. You're not a guest here. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Claire set down her duffel bag and walked to the window, looking out at gardens lit by subtle landscape lighting, and she started crying in earnest then, not sad tears, but overwhelmed ones. The release of years of tension and fear and the desperate exhaustion of never being enough. And James quietly wheeled himself away, giving her privacy to fall apart. And that small act of respect made her cry harder, because even her breakdown was being treated with dignity. The first weeks in James's home were strange and careful. Two damaged people circling each other like rescue animals, learning to trust, Claire expecting the other shoe to drop, waiting for James to reveal the real price of his generosity, while James seemed equally uncertain, treating Claire like something precious but fragile that might shatter if he made the wrong move. They established routines, slowly breakfast together when both were awake, Claire gradually taking over some cooking because she enjoyed it, and James appreciated food that wasn't prepared by professional chefs. Trying too hard to impress. Evenings in the library where they'd read in comfortable silence, or sometimes talk about books, movies, the safe topics that didn't require vulnerability. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, was a warm woman in her 60s who treated Claire with grandmotherly affection and didn't ask uncomfortable questions about the arrangement. Just seemed genuinely happy that James had someone in the house. "He's been too alone," she told Claire one morning while teaching her how James preferred his coffee. "Since the accident, he's withdrawn so much. But you're good for him. I can see it already. He smiles more." Claire wasn't sure she believed that she could be good for anyone, but she tried to be present, to be honest, like James had asked. And slowly she began to believe that maybe this wasn't a trap. Maybe this was just what James had described to people who understood loneliness, trying to build something like friendship in the spaces between their wounds. The first real test came 6 weeks after Claire arrived, when Victoria called demanding to speak to her daughter, and James brought Claire the phone with a question in his eyes, offering but not pressuring. Claire took the call in her room, and Victoria's voice dripped with false concern. "Claire, darling, I've been so worried. You haven't called. How are you managing?" The hypocrisy was stunning, and Claire felt anger rising. a hot, clean feeling she'd been too afraid to access before, because anger required believing you deserved better. I'm fine, Mother. Better than fine, actually. Victoria's tone shifted, becoming wheedling. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Listen, I've run into some financial difficulties. Just temporary. But I thought perhaps you could ask James for a small loan. 20,000 helped, but you know how expenses add up, and since you're living there, surely he wouldn't mind helping your poor mother. Claire understood then, with crystalline clarity, that Victoria would never stop, would never see Claire as anything but a resource to exploit, and that the only way forward was to cut the cord completely, to choose her own well-being over the desperate hope that someday her mother might love her. No, Claire said simply. I won't ask James for money for you. I won't be your connection to his wealth. And I won't have a relationship with you built on financial transactions. If you want to be my mother, actually be my mother. Call me because you care how I'm doing, not because you need something. But I'm not holding my breath. Victoria's response was immediate and vicious, the mask dropping completely as she called Claire ungrateful, selfish, abandoning the woman who'd raised her, conveniently forgetting who had sold whom. And Claire listened to the tirade with a strange detachment, because these words, which once would have destroyed her, now seemed small and powerless. The angry buzzing of someone who'd lost their ability to hurt. Goodbye, Mother, Claire said quietly, and hung up. And when James found her an hour later, she was crying, but also somehow lighter, grief and relief mixed together. She wanted money, Claire said, not a question. James nodded, settling his wheelchair near where Claire sat on her bed. They always do. People who see relationships as transactions. I'm sorry. You deserved better than her. I know, Claire said, and realized she meant it. Was starting to believe it, not just intellectually, but in her bones. I deserved better, and I'm starting to think maybe I found it here, if that's okay, if I'm not presuming too much. James smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. Claire, you've made this house feel like a home again. You cook meals that taste like someone cares. You argue with me about books, and tell me when I'm being too rigid about schedules. You see me as James, not as Chen technologist or the guy in the wheelchair. You have no idea how valuable that is. How human you make me feel. So yes, it's more than okay. You belong here for as long as you want. That conversation marked a shift in their relationship, from careful politeness to genuine friendship. Claire started joining James in his home office sometimes, learning about his business, not because she had to, but because she was curious. And James discovered that Claire had a natural aptitude for user interface design, seeing software from the perspective of regular people rather than engineers. And he started asking her opinions, valuing her input, eventually offering her a position in the company, if she wanted it. Not charity, but recognition of actual talent. Claire enrolled in online courses, discovering a love for graphic design and digital art, her portfolio growing as James provided not just resources, but encouragement, celebrating her progress and accepting her setbacks without judgment, teaching her that failure was part of learning, rather than confirmation of worthlessness. They celebrated Claire's 18th birthday, with a small party, just Claire, James, Mrs. Patterson, and Robert the driver. But it was the first birthday in Claire's memory, where she felt genuinely celebrated, where the gifts were thoughtful, rather than obligatory, where James gave her a professional drawing tablet and a handwritten card that said, "For the artist you're becoming. Thank you for helping me become who I needed to be too." 8 months after Claire arrived, James had a medical crisis, an infection that required hospitalization, and Claire found herself terrified at the thought of losing him, realized that somewhere in their careful friendship, he'd become the first person she'd ever truly loved, not romantically, but as family, as the father figure she'd never had. And she stayed at the hospital, despite his protests that she should go home and rest. "Why are you here?" James asked during one lucid moment between pain medications. You don't owe me this. Claire took his hand carefully. Because you're my family. Because you saw me when I was invisible. Because you gave me a home and never asked for anything except honesty. Because you're important to me, James. Not because of what you've provided, but because of who you are. And I'm not leaving. James's eyes filled with tears. I never expected this when I made that arrangement with your mother. I thought maybe we'd coexist peacefully, maybe form a cordial acquaintance. I never imagined I'd gain a daughter.